No matter what we do, we are all a product of the people around us and the people who raised us. Minnesota Vikings players are no different. Welcome to the Everyman series on the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, and welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, where we're always trying to learn something new. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And thank you so much to my hashtag everydayers, those of you who come and tune in every single day. Love hearing from you, even if I don't agree with you, still love hearing from you. So thank you all for tuning in, leaving YouTube comments and all that. I appreciate you very much. If you are new here, hello and welcome. This is the Locked On Vikings podcast. My name is Luke. I will be your host, and you can find this show by searching out Locked On Vikings anywhere you listen to your favorite podcasts, including YouTube or Amazon Fire and Roku, and you just download the Locked On Minnesota Sports app. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. It's $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. Today on the show, we are spending the whole show on the Everyman Series entry for Walter Rouse. The Everyman Series is something we do here every summer, where we talk about the backstories and the journey to the NFL for each new Vikings players, which includes all of the rookies, of course. But before I get into Walter Rouse's whole story, I have to tell you about the 1963 NCAA championship. It was Loyola Chicago versus Cincinnati, and it was a very important game. Here's the thing about sports. They aren't really, as much as entertainment can be an escape from the goings-on of around the world and politics and world events and all that stuff, they can only be so much of an escape, because at a certain point they turn into a reflection of current events instead of an escape from them. And in the 60s, that was maybe the most true that it ever has been. And in 1963... for example, if you go listen to the history doc, patreon.com/LukeBraunNFL, just go to the collections tab and find the history of the Minnesota Vikings, a 7-part documentary series, if you want to basically watch a season of TV about the Vikings history. But part of that went over I think it was 63 Michigan State team, which produced a lot of Vikings, but the Michigan State team was one of the first colleges to integrate their team. This was the 60s. This was a bit of news. And Loyola Chicago was doing that and sort of bucking the trend that way in college basketball. There was, I'll call it a custom. It wasn't a rule, but it was like everybody kind of agreed that you would only have 2 black players on your team, on your college basketball team. And Loyola Chicago was one of the first schools to say, nah, we're going to do whatever we want. And they made it all the way to the NCAA championship that year. It was Loyola Chicago versus Cincinnati, and it was down to the wire. Final seconds. It's 58-58. Loyola gets a pretty good shot, but it doesn't go. They get the rebound. They get a mid-range jumper. Also doesn't go. But on the third go, the putback is in. Time was still on the clock, and that would end up being the game winner. It is, to this day, the only championship that Loyola Chicago has ever won. And kind of the thing people were reminiscing about when they made that run a couple years ago. And the putback man was Vic Rouse, grandfather of Walter. And I tell you that story to set the stage for the kind of patriarch that created the Rouse family and that shaped Walter Rouse into the man that he is today, that he became well before he came to Minnesota. Vic Rouse died before Walter was born. He died in like 1999. But he raised that family. He grew up in segregated Nashville in the 50s. And one of the things that stuck with him the most from that era was how important education was, because that's the thing that everybody was trying to deny him. As one of those black players on that Loyola Chicago team, that's the thing that people fought against the most, was education. And so that, I think, taught him, okay, this is the thing that matters. It's what they don't want me to have. He himself would get his bachelor's degree and then his master's degree and then another master's degree and then a third master's degree. And he instilled that value in his son, Victor, who in turn got his own master's degree. And Victor always told Walter Rouse, you get your degree before anything else. This is the important thing. So throughout all of his football playing time, Walter Rouse has put academics above football. And, you'll hear a lot of that talk from colleges that are like, well, we're the school that really makes sure that your child is getting educated and isn't just getting a free pass for being athletics. And it's never true. But in this case, it's definitely priority A for Walter Rouse throughout all of his high school playing days and college. And I think when you have had professional athletics in the family before, it's kind of easy to get that. Sports ultimately are fleeting. Even if you're the best ever, it's still going to end well before you're no longer of working age, right? You have to have some kind of plan afterwards. And Walter Rouse has his, and we'll get to it. But it doesn't matter how much you love sports. Sports do not love you back all of the time. And so Victor Rouse told his son, get your degree before anything else. It's great that sports are going to be the thing you enjoy the most, but they're not going to stick with you in the way that a degree will. That is what he was told. I also want to introduce you to Teresa Lucas, who is Walter Rouse's aunt, another inspiration for him. A major source for this particular episode was a Sooners Illustrated article that went over a lot of his relationships to his family. It is a phenomenal piece. I will link it in the show notes. Please yell at me if I forget. And it used like superheroes as this like framing device for all of the people. This person was his Superman, this person was his Batman, that kind of thing. Very cute framing device. Absolutely worked way better than it did when I described it just now. And I'll link it there. But the reason that they did that is because Walter Rouse is like a big comic book nerd, and in particular loves the 1970s Ultimate run of Spider-Man. So they used it there. But one of the people is Teresa Lucas, his aunt. She was born in 1966, just a few years after the Loyola basketball game that I just talked about, and she was born with Down syndrome. She would ultimately live to 51 years old, which at the time was kind of unheard of. You got to understand that Down syndrome drastically shortens your life expectancy. And back then, like, her parents were told this baby might not even make it home from the hospital, let alone to her first birthday, 51 years later, right? And she had done a lot of really cool stuff in her life, and Walter Rouse kind of had a front row seat and had a very good relationship with her to see every day what she would overcome, and it would always put his own life in kind of that perspective. And she had a saying all the time. She would just say, just keep it going. Just keep it going. And that mantra has sort of seared itself into Walter Rouse's brain. And it's something that you'll catch him saying as well. And what I get from just not only that piece, a lot of that piece, but like everything that I read for this podcast is that Walter Rouse has always been surrounded by a support system that not only has the experiences to like keep his own in perspective, but has really instilled that sense of values. Education is important, the civil rights, the trailblazing that Vic Rouse did and all that, has given him this, I guess I'll call it a generational wisdom that he still carries. But it's not like things were always smooth sailing for Walter Rouse. He has experienced a lot of loss, and he struggled a little bit as a kid, too. We'll get into that next. Today's episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. We still are technically in final season. It is circling the drain, both 2 3-1 series and in both hockey and basketball. But if you say wanted to go gamble on Mavs Celtics or on Oilers Panthers, you can go do so at FanDuel.com/lockedon. You can get $200 back in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. You can use that to bet on anything from the finals MVP to home run props to whatever you want. You can even go, and I encouraged you go check FanDuel's website often, because they'll often have like these boosted things. Like they've got a same game parlay right now, a 5-leg parlay if you're interested in the Mavericks making more of a series out of it. It's like Mavs money line and a bunch of unders. If that's the kind of basketball game you think you're going to see, you can go check all that out. Once again, you can find that all at FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Thank you very much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. When you're done here, if you want some more traditional Minnesota sports talk, but without the like talking heads yelling at each other thing you get on TV, go check out Locked On Minnesota Sports on YouTube. Go check out their live page, and there is a 24/7 live stream of Locked On shows in the same format as this one, Locked On Wolves, Wild, Twins, whatever you want. You can find it there on Locked On Minnesota Sports. In elementary school, Walter Rouse struggled a little bit with reading. He fell behind with reading when he was growing up. And that was frustrating to him. And it wasn't until he found comic books that he really fell in love with reading as a kid. And that not only did it like help him, like give him something to like learn on and like get past the hurdle that he was at like developmentally, but then he fell in love with reading, and he eventually, you know, graduated to more mature literature, and Shakespeare and Hemingway eventually came in. And that, coupled with this very strong encouragement from his parents, he became not only very, like, he held his academics in high regard, but he came to like it, and learning and reading and all that. And he became like a nerd in a couple of ways, right? Like the comic book nerd thing, but also just a little bit of a school nerd. And this sort of curiosity keeps popping up. He's definitely a guy that like liked school. Or at least it's the sense that I get in like cross-referencing a bunch of different interviews with him and stuff. And he did eventually decide he wanted to go into the medical field, which for parents that are like, education is everything, you must take your academics seriously. When your kid comes up to you and is like, I want to be a doctor, you're like, yeah, absolutely, we're into that. What can we do to help? Like, that must be such a dream come true. But when it came time for him, you know, as a high school player, he didn't actually get involved in football at all until he was in high school. And it took a little bit of persuading to get his mom to let him do it. And he actually put together an entire PowerPoint presentation on like, this is why I should be allowed to play football. And how can you say no to that? So they say, okay. And they, of course, they had no idea that it was going to lead all the way to being drafted into the pros. But that was like where it started, which is honestly kind of unique among this Everyman series. Most of the players we talk about pick up a football when they're 4 years old, or they're like rambunctious kids that, you know, you just send them out with whatever the closest ball is so that they can burn off some energy, and they end up falling in love with football that way. You don't often see I was like a sophomore and I wanted to try something new, and then he just like takes to it, right? But he was, I think, a 3-star recruit by the time he was coming out of high school. But when it came time to do the essay portion, he got like massive writer's block. And as the story, as his mom tells it, is like, we sent him in his room to like go do your college things. And we were worried he was never going to come out because he was never going to be able to like write it. And he had to ask for kind of help, for inspiration. And his mom said, look, write what you know. Write what you're comfortable with, and then that will give them a sense for who you are. So do that. And he said, okay, I'm going to write about superheroes. And he wrote his college essays about superheroes. If you are of that age and you're thinking you're about to get into your college application process, I think some people, I mean, we kind of just got past that, huh? I guess all the deadlines kind of just passed, but maybe you're going to come around next year and you're thinking about it. That's not the worst advice ever, because it got him into Stanford. Stanford, and he wants to be a doctor. Like, this is perfect. This is for the like academics is everything family. Now, of course, the essay is only going to have a very small amount to do with this, and I'm editorializing a little bit to make the story work here. But obviously, this is a football thing, too. 3-star recruit. He's a very exciting player that like gets his offers and ends up getting his Stanford scholarship. And it is in college where he's going to experience some of the bigger hardships that sort of guide him into this world of having to like rediscover himself on the fly when he ends up at Oklahoma. That's going to be next. Walter Rouse didn't even think he was going to be at this point. He thought he was going to be a basketball player, to be honest. And maybe if he was going to go to college on a sports scholarship, it would be a basketball scholarship. After all, look at who his grandfather was. But here he is on a football scholarship in his freshman year. This would be 2019. And then he gets really bad news. His father died of a heart attack. Considering the heart condition that ultimately was the cause of his aunt Teresa Lucas's death, the aunt with Down syndrome, he takes that, and he already wanted to get into the medical field, but now he like wants to do cardiology. And he still, to this day, wants to do cardiology. When football is over, that's like the move that he's probably gonna go toward, however long that takes, right? This is certainly not the first time he has lost somebody. His family has lost somebody. His uncle's passed. Obviously, his grandfather passed. His other grandfather passed. And at this point, this is the kind of thing that sports can be. And I have no idea if this is like actually applies to him personally, but for a lot of players, grief and processing grief when you have sports in your life, like when you have that sense of routine, you know, you're there at 2:00 every single day and you're doing physical work, processing like that can help you process grief. And then also in a weird way, like fuse with it and motivate you. No idea. I mean, it's not exactly a question a reporter's going to like ask Walter Rouse. I have no idea if that's the case. However, it is a thing that certainly happens. I can at least tell you that. And it becomes all the more important for his mother to, you know, find a way to get out to games. And the way his mom, Helena is her name, talks about it, it's very important for her to get to all the games. She grew up, you know, doing sports and stuff. And, you know, mom and dad can make it here and there, but not really like as regularly and as dedicated. And she wanted to be dedicated. So she would go she's waking up to catch 5 a.m. flights to get down to Tulsa to go watch a game. Like, she's dedicated, and I think that becomes even more important with Victor Rouse's passing. But I actually just kind of want to fast forward here. He'll start 3 years at Stanford. He'll, you know, go through a fairly normal trajectory, but his senior year at Stanford, redshirt junior year, I guess you'd call it, he would encounter other struggles that are very much outside his control. The program goes 3-9. The head coach that had been there since his second year would get fired, like on the day after the season, like just one of those years. And this was supposed to be the year where he thought he was kind of starting. He was starting to get the NFL seed in his mind. Remember, I mean, this kid picked up football when he was 14, 15 years old, like for the first time, right? So the idea of the NFL wasn't an inkling. The idea of like getting a scholarship to Stanford was the goal. And then he had that goal. And I think it doesn't sound like he really set his sights at the next level until his senior year. And he started to think, wow, like I'm a starting lineman on this, you know, prestigious program. Offensive linemen get drafted from Stanford all the time. What about the NFL, right? But he'll get hurt that year. He'll miss some time. The team is bad. It just, nothing goes right. And because they're bringing in a new coaching staff and he's graduated, he decides that he is going to try to find a better avenue and enter the transfer portal. And the transfer portal saga here gets a little bit, it sounds like one of the recruiting sagas. He'll go and visit Nebraska and Auburn. Those are the two schools he really liked. He'll visit Nebraska, and the way he tells it, he was like kind of expecting Nebraska to be like podunk nowhere and to not be that interested in it. But the University of Nebraska in the college town, and he said it was like a little more urban than he was expecting, and he liked that. That was the word he used, urban. But yeah, I think he just thought it was going to be like farm town, and it wasn't. So he was like, oh, that's great. And it like beat his expectations. So he really liked it. and he'll end up declaring, I'm going to be a Cornhusker, go Nebraska. And then like the next day he wakes up and going, and he goes like, I think I rushed that decision. I think I thought about that a little bit too fast. And maybe I just had set my expectations so low that I was happy that they beat them. And then I like mistook that for actually liking the school. So I'm not going to do it. And it takes him like 2 days, and Oklahoma had been in contact with him since he was a recruit. Oklahoma had been in contact with him. And the offensive line coach, Bill Bedenbaugh, who is like the guy that gets all the credit for Oklahoma and their like offensive line reputation, which eclipses Stanford's for sure. And he'll transfer to Oklahoma. Within like 2 days, he flips and he declares, I'm going to Oklahoma. If you followed that saga really closely, you might be yelling at me right now over like, no, it was about NIL. I couldn't confirm or deny anything about that. I'm not going to weigh in on that particular issue. You can take whatever opinion you want to the grave. But regardless, he'll go to Oklahoma. And at Oklahoma, his mindset has now fully flipped into football. And it's really funny because usually when you hear about like the grad transfer thing, we all know that they're like trying to get to a better program, right? They want to win a championship. They want to get drafted. They want to surround themselves with this talent. Or maybe they're getting to somewhere where, they couldn't play at their old school, but they could get playing time here. So like it's for football reason a lot of the time is why they like do the grad transfer thing. But you never hear them say it out loud. They'll be like, "Oh, I love the academics here." And it's even rarer to like hear the opposite, to hear the quiet part said out loud. But this is what Walter Rouse will say. And he will be very upfront about this. He had been very focused on academics for his whole life until it became clear that, like, man, if I stayed healthy and Stanford wasn't such a joke, like, I might have gotten drafted last year. But I didn't stay healthy, and so I'm not going to get drafted, so I'm going to go back to school and I'm going to give this another shot. And he's like, yeah, academics are priority B right now. Like, who says that in college football ever? But he'll say it out loud, like to the media. He'll be like, yeah, I'm focused on football. Football is the thing, and academics are sort of, back burner. So the plan is that he's going to do football for as long as football lasts. He has his season at Oklahoma. It's a good season. I like what I saw from him for whatever it's worth. I'll probably do that in a different show we talked about it a little bit, like in the very aftermath, like immediate aftermath of the draft. So that I guess stands on its own for now. But that's the deal. He is going to do football for as long as football lasts, and then it's on to the path toward becoming a cardiologist, and he wants to focus specifically in like pediatrics. So he becomes like the first in, last out kind of guy. Like, football was a means to an end before, and that end was this career in the medical field. That was like what he was really here to do, and football is going to help me get there, but I'm not really here for that. I'm here for like to go work on hearts. And now for the first time, he is here for football, and he is throwing himself into football in the way he threw himself into academics before. And the results speak for themselves. He gets drafted. That now is going to be where he's at. He's here in Minnesota. He's what a sixth round pick, right? 6th round pick. That does not guarantee you a roster spot in the abstract. He's looking at that group. He's got a pretty good shot at it, but now he's sort of in this temp world where you just kind of never know how long it's going to last. There are plenty of 6th round picks that get cut by their original team that drafted them and never make another team. And in 9 months, they're going, okay, what's my actual career going to be? Walter Rouse has that answer to that question. And it's just sort of a matter of time, whether that's 1 year or 10. The NFL dream has kind of wedged itself into his life plans. And for now, we do this. Tomorrow is Twitter Tuesday. Send me your questions. You can email them to me at lockedonvikingspodcast@gmail.com or fill out the Google form in the show notes. I'll put a call out on Twitter as well on Monday morning, so you can check that out. I will see you all for that. And as always, Skol.